All right. Thank you for patiently waiting. This is another episode of the Mixed Mental Arts Chats. This week, we're talking about the culture war. I know it sounds super ambiguous, but it is kind of super ambiguous. So let's jump into introductions. I am the woke centrist, aka Dusty Cubes. And I'm just going to go ahead and go down the line as I see it on my screen. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Chris.
Chris from Canada, longtime fan of the podcast and listener. Hey, what's up, everybody?
All right, thank you for attending. And we have one that really doesn't need an introduction, but go ahead, Hunter.
Hey, everybody. My name is Hunter Motz. Given that literally thousands of people out of the 7.5 billion on the planet know me, I think I still probably need an introduction. I co-host the Mixed Mental Arts podcast, and I'm really looking forward to talking about the culture wars.
All right. And we have next up our audiophile extraordinaire, Mr. Isaiah.
Oh, me. Okay. I was caught off guard there. Hi, I'm Isaiah. I am a person and I talk sometimes.
Awesome. Next up, we have a well-traveled man. Go ahead, Layden.
Hello. My name is Ladin, and I am the host of the Travel Wisdom podcast and Neural Implant podcast. Been following Mixed Mental Arts for a very long time. I love it so much, I'm changing the name of my Travel Wisdom podcast to Mixed Mental Arts. Well, I'm going to add it to the end. But yeah, I'm a fan of everything, and I'm ready for the wars. Put them up.
Awesome. All right, next up, we have a staunch defender of misrepresentations of Sam Harris. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself, Ed?
Hi, everybody. I'm Edward Kennedy, a.k.a. Sam's Bulldog. I enjoy talking to my buddies at MMA. I'm enjoying this one, too. Hi, everybody.
Awesome. And last but not least, Mr. Skulls, introduce yourself.
My name's Sean. I'm from Massachusetts, and I love you guys.
Sweet. So today we come together to talk about the culture war. And many of you may be asking, what the hell is a culture war? Well, in the United States in particular, I'm not too well versed about cultural clashing across the globe. But what I'm referencing here is the recent spike of partisanship in our country. And today I just wanted to talk about what is causing it and how can we fix it? And what started this bump in recent history. In my opinion, I don't know if this is anybody else's opinion. I think it starts around 2014. And there's multiple factors that I think contribute to that. One just being the way that media is incentivized to make money, and how the internet has since made the expectations of people to believe that all content should be free. It's great. We do have access to a lot of free content, but that also diminishes the actual quality of the content that we consume. And it is, in my opinion, that the media environment that we have today is just a consequence of the hunger for free content. What do you guys think about that thesis?
I'd also say that there's the fact that because there's much more competition, and as a result, people are willing to go to almost any length to get eyeballs or to get attention. So, when there were only 4 channels, it became fairly easy for the community to police themselves and then police them internally. But, now you can have a guy like our buddy from InfoWars who will literally put fucking anything on the internet to get eyeballs. And it's not just him. There are lots of other outlets like that. BuzzFeed, Huffington Post, and even with something like BuzzFeed, you can't necessarily say that BuzzFeed is all shit. And so what ends up happening is that, it just becomes, we just haven't developed good cultural norms around handling quality either.
I don't know if I agree with either of your theses here, because the culture war, it depends on the scope in which we're defining the conflict, as it were. If we're talking about a clash between left and right as such, the Republicans and the Democrats, that's one layer of the culture war. But there's also the clash that's been going on since the start of the country, of the people who live in cities versus the people who live in the country, so there's that aspect of it. And there's also the aspect of, those who are assimilated to the Anglo-American culture and those immigrants who are not completely assimilated to that culture. So those two stand in opposition. Like, we have the modern media landscape, as you guys were describing. It might make it seem like the culture war is more present and more in the forefront of public discourse at large because more people have voices, but that's not to say that prior to now those same conflicts didn't exist.
Yeah, the other thing that I would also say is that even if you look at the left-right conflict, that has been heating up since World War II. So obviously Vietnam was a big splitting point. Usually when I've heard the culture wars, it's to refer to the sort of increasing tribalization and partisanship between red and blue that's been happening since World War II, not so much a much more recent phenomenon.
Yeah, I think you guys are all pretty correct. I mean, I don't know if you guys have read American Nations: A History of 11 Rival Regional Cultures of North America by Colin Woodard, but it is an excellent book, basically saying that there are 11 different cultures and really 11 different countries that should actually be comprising, Mexico, US, and Canada. And so I think these cultures have really been in place more or less since the 1600s. And I think that Dusty is right in saying that it has gotten worse in the last few years for getting those eyeballs and really showing the other, be like, oh, look at what these, flyover states people are doing, or what these different cultures are doing, and kind of enraging to get clicks. But I think that underlying, that foundation, that difference has always been there. But yeah, it has gotten worse. I mean, I guess maybe it stepped up, during the Vietnam War, and then it stepped up again, in 2014. But it was, that split's always been there, and there's always been a difference.
I would agree with what Dusty said and with what Isaiah said. I mean, I think the internet blooming and starting in the 90s as it did brings all these cultures together. And I think as we connect more and more, that those cultures are going to just grow, that community is just going to grow and grow. It's kind of like how Hunter always says, where it's a first family dinner and everybody's getting together for the first time. Yeah, so I'd agree with what both you guys said about that. But the internet has a huge part of bringing all these cultures together for sure. And I think that's why you're seeing much more of a clash and polarization now.
Yeah, and to feed off of what Christopher was saying, I mean, I think it's that those differences have been there for a long time. And to feed off of what Isaiah is saying about people who haven't assimilated into the Anglo-American sort of dominant culture, for a long time, there's one group of people who had the mic. And so that essentially became the dominant medium of cultural expression. And now, because of the internet, I mean, just look at this conversation. Literally everyone has a mic. And so you can have a whole bunch of voices coming together and having a voice and building their own media outlets and being heard much more clearly than ever before.
Yeah, I almost feel like media literacy needs to be taught in school. I can't say what's going on now, but I know when I was growing up, I was on school newspapers. I was taught what to do in order to present information to people in the most objective way as possible. It seems that now we don't have a lot of media literacy in regards to what is online is considered an opinion, a fact. You know, a lot of this has gotten really blurry for a lot of people. And I find it unfortunate that a lot of times I have to tell people, okay, like I understand this blog post, says this about this situation, but what are they commenting on? Let's find the original source, and then you find out the original source is an opinion piece. And then in that opinion piece, they have an opinion without corroborative, pieces of information for whatever thing that is being asserted. And then this blog is asserting that this opinion piece is fact. So it's getting very murky in the online media landscape right now.
And just for the record, Brienne Jude, aka Jenkins B. Jennings, who cuts all the knowledge bombs, that's what he teaches is media literacy. And I think that's also part of the question is, where do we think the educational changes that we want to have happen come from? Do we think that those educational changes are going to come from the government, or do we think it's going to come from a group of citizens like, for example, Mixed Mental Arts banding together to package and get these messages out there?
I don't know. Maybe we just need to talk to, and this might be a good idea for Mixed Mental Arts as far as, getting a guest on. But just see if we can get like maybe someone who teaches journalism or, has knowledge, like a lot of knowledge about journalistic ethics, just to talk about, what's important to look for when you're consuming media that's supposed to be reporting the truth. But I think that's also really important for young minds who we're trying to shape right now. I remember as a very young elementary school kid, we had to do current events assignments that always had to deal with, reading your local newspaper, and it couldn't be an opinion piece. That's something that wasn't taught, that was important at a young age for someone from my generation.
Yeah, I'd agree. We could definitely get more people like that on the podcast. But I think my basic point is, given the dysfunction of the government, which is obviously connected to the media, I just think that the likelihood that just doesn't seem to me like focusing on getting the government to fix itself as a prelude to fixing media education so that 20, 30 years from now, the citizenry is better educated about media makes much sense. I think the reality is that, we as the community of people on the internet are going to have to spread that media literacy before we can even get the clarity on what we should believe in order to fix the government.
Well, yeah, hopefully it should be some type of organic movement. This is something I would suggest to people who claim to be in the center of things. I can't really say that much about those who are closer to the fringes to be supportive of these actions. But as far as the government goes, that's always a touchy subject, to have the government involved in what people should deem as the truth. That's might be going back to 1984 status right there.
I don't know. I think I think this mitral cycle, people kind of discovered Facebook and what it's powerful or capable of, and then now they're kind of sick of it, or like they're sick of the very biased stuff, and us as a culture collectively, we're having these same realizations. And so I'm thinking it might even be like an organic, I don't know, like ebb and flow of what we can tolerate or what we like. So I don't know, maybe we don't have to involve government, or we don't have to, radically change the school system, but we can, this will just happen. This will pop up naturally. And maybe even MMA is a result of this. It's like, hey guys, this is really weird. I don't like this. Let's stop this. Let's look at this rationally, because I guess you can only be angry for so long before you're like, maybe I shouldn't be angry.
Yeah, that's
Agreed.
a really good point. That like MMA is a way of us all slowly, individually changing ourselves and learning and improving ourselves on an individual level and in kind of a collective level too.
Yeah, and that's inevitably what emerges from this. I mean, the more of these conversations we have, the more we're all being intentional about what narratives we believe, to the end of what narratives are actually going to serve us as a community. Because, and that's the whole point, is the intelligence comes down to decisions. That's, the Latin word intelligence comes from interlegere, to choose between, choose one thing over another. And the information space is now so confused and chaotic that humanity can't make good decisions on a whole variety of things. And so if we really want to fix the world, then we have to improve the information space, not by like some sort of top down, the government says what the truth is, but from a bottom up of us all testing our own and each other's narratives to evolve a set of narratives and a set of stories that lead to more productive and pro-social stories.
So Hunter, what you're saying is that the information space is clouded with people telling stories that don't necessarily mesh up with reality or what other people are saying. Because I feel like just saying, oh, we have to curate the information space, or we have to retool how we communicate ideas, kind of glosses over the fact that people believe that what they see as true is true. Like on the forum recently, there have been several threads that were started about the current situation in Palestine, and that's a situation in which I could give whatever arguments I want to uphold my position, but there's little to nothing that I can do to change somebody else's position on that, especially the closer that they are to it. So how do you bridge that gap there? And similarly, there's the abortion question in the United States. That's one of the key battlegrounds of the culture war.
Yeah, so that's why the foundation of all of this is clearing up how humans think and how humans work. So what you're talking about is naive realism, which is obviously something that I have emphasized repeatedly on the podcast.
And tribalism.
So you have to, that metacognition, or that thinking about thinking, that being aware of how we humans think, is the first step, right? Like you have to have awareness of what are these pitfalls, what are these cognitive biases. And then having clarified that, then we have the ability to build larger and larger communities of people who are like, I have this story about, say, Palestinians or Israelis. That's the story that I have always picked up for my culture. That's what the newspapers I read. That's the echo chamber I'm in. And then be more intentional about, how well does that fit the facts, and what facts does it leave out? Because there are definitely sins of commission where you actively lie, but a lot of it is just sins of omission where you don't tell the other side's story.
And that's one of the key problems with any like international relations type issue, is that it lies on omission, right? Because people are unaware. Like, I'm sure that there's 18-year-olds today who were 1 year old when September 11th happened. So they don't have the cultural memory of why we're at war in Afghanistan, right? So it becomes a game of historical telephone at that point. And it's the same thing that is going on in Gaza and Israel writ large, in the Middle East as a whole, in that people are not necessarily misinformed or uninformed. It's that the information that they have been given is tailored for a purpose based on who's providing the information. That's one aspect. But there's also, what does in the United States, what does the war in Israel have to do with the price of tea in China? That's like one of my key evaluators for looking at information that's being shot at me every day on the internet, right? What does this have to do with the price of tea in China? It's a heuristic that I use to say, how does this matter to me, or how does this matter to what is important to me?
And that's the other thing too, is that often the causes and the effects are not clear. So a lot of these things seem to be irrelevant to us, but they actually are profoundly relevant. I mean, the most extreme example, if you look at something like campaign finance, which obviously is something that on this podcast and in this community we've talked about a lot of people just don't see how campaign finance is relevant to them. Second you say the phrase campaign finance, they're like, right? They get bored. And so part of it is just helping them see the causality so they can see, this thing that you fucking hate that screws up your life, that's because of campaign finance. And
so to get on that point, let's define within the context of the culture war, because let's try and keep this as on topic as possible. What are some of the key battlegrounds that the culture war is being fought on? I mentioned abortion and Israel as two of them. And you mentioned campaign finance. I think that is an important one as well. But what are some other battlegrounds that the culture war is being fought on?
Oh, there's a number. There's climate. There's regulation versus deregulation, which is ridiculous that it even has
religion.
Religion. That's that can be
that might be kind of separate from culture in a way, but they're connected.
Oh, they're certainly connected.
Immigration too.
Yeah, certainly immigration. This another thing is
gun control.
Yeah, gun control. Sure. Economics, wealth inequality.
Joe Rogan's favorite is transgender, gender studies or whatever.
Drugs.
Yeah,
welfare.
Welfare. There's so many.
Okay, so let's pick one and lay out the arguments and try and flesh out what it is that basically what let's basically do what John Haidt does in The Righteous Mind, because The Righteous Mind is probably one of the more salient examples of drawing out how this culture war is being fought, why it's being fought, who the players are, and what the players believe. Because this is like, when we say culture war, it's a expression to show. Sorry, there's a alarm going off in my for my washing machine, but it's a name that we use to show vehement disagreements between different aspects of American culture, specifically in this context. So let's do a righteous mind exercise and show how these arguments are broken. If we truly believe that they are broken, let's show how they are broken.
Well, I think if you're taking Jonathan Haidt's model for almost everything, a a lot of what I see the culture war is about is proving who has the moral high ground rather than, you know, what are the facts on the ground and what can we work with. Like,
And
that's
specifically proving who has the moral high ground by defending whatever beliefs we internalize, usually as a child, from our parents, who internalize them from their parents, from their parents, from their parents.
Or that we're trained to internalize through whatever tribe that we join.
Yeah, so I know Jonathan Haidt in The Righteous Mind does outline how strong of a force morality plays in the way different factions make their decisions about just basically about everything that has to do with intertribal relations.
Okay, so again, let's try and flesh out some of these arguments, right? Because just talking about it in a meta way doesn't really elucidate the detail to which one can truly understand what exactly is going on here. Like, let's tackle let's do a really hot button one and just go into abortion. Like, what are the arguments there that keeps that being a hot button topic for in every election that we go through in the United States?
It's that the two tribes see it completely differently. One tribe sees abortion as murder, and one tribe sees abortion as the woman's choice about her own body, and the other tribe sees it as you killing a life.
Yeah, it's total moral foundations theory.
Can you expand on that?
On moral foundations theory?
Yes.
Again, Jonathan Haidt, moral foundations theory. Actually, I think Hunter explained it the best on Rogan when he brought up that exact issue with abortions, Republicans. Yeah, why don't you take it away, Hunter? I'm kind of stumbling here.
So yeah, moral foundations theories, we all have the same basic moral foundations, but we wrap them around different causes. So if you look at abortion, for example, you know, for liberals, it's about freedom, right? It's about liberty, right? The woman's right to choose. On the other hand, for conservatives, it's about care, protecting people from harm, right? They're pro-life. So in general, who is anti-life? Nobody's anti-life as a principle. Who is anti-freedom? In America, nobody really. But they have wrapped their particular perspective in these sacred values. If you look at gun control, you see that conservatives and liberals take the opposite sides. So, you know, Second Amendment rights, the ability to use guns, well, that's about pro-choice, right? So conservatives are pro-choice there. And they're basically saying, you know, you should have the freedom to use guns, my Second Amendment right, freedom. And then, that's my conservative voice. And then liberals say that they, you know, it's about saving life. Like, our babies are dying, so we need to, you know, restrict gun control. But what you see is on these two hot button issues, they seem bipolar, right? Like, liberals are both pro-life and pro-choice, and conservatives are both pro-life and pro-choice.
So how did that
and
happen?
I mean, you know, these narratives evolve over time, but it does come out of what those respective cultures are. So in general, the liberal culture is a, you know, dignity culture, and dignity cultures tend to resolve their conflicts through the courts. So the intuitions of farmers tend to be, oh, if we have some sort of boundary dispute over our property, we go and we talk it out through the courts. Honor cultures like Southern culture, it's about herding. And so if you come and you steal my sheep, I fucking kill you. So they don't trust the courts. They don't trust the government to resolve conflicts. And that's their historical experience. In general, the English fucked over the Scots-Irish. So instead, they want to resolve their conflicts through their guns. And so, you know, then those basic intuitions that, as you were saying, with the 11 nations are actually, you know, back to the 1600s and beyond, haven't changed for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it's just the rationalizations have gotten more and more complex. And now at this point, you have two competing religions. And, you know, the reality is that, you know, the process of building an effective nation is about evolving a single religion. And
so,
you know,
why is it two religions and not 11? Why is it only Pepsi and Coca-Cola?
That's what I was going to say as well.
Well, it's a question of
Great minds think
taxonomy,
alike.
right? Well, unfortunately, one of the great minds has disco lights in the background.
That's not an unfortunate thing. It's a very fortunate thing. You're very lucky, guys.
Yeah, that's really fortunate.
No, but I mean, unfortunately, in the sense that I wish that Isaiah also had disco lights.
This is a workspace, man.
Yeah, but the point is what LaDon understands is that work is play, and that really effective, innovative work is play, and so that's why he's made his workspace into a play space.
I feel like you're being quite pejorative to me right now. I feel marginalized.
Also, by the way, your workspace is full of about 1,000 musical instruments. So, you know, seems quite playful. So, but anyway, yeah, no, I mean, this is the basic problem of having a conversation about anything in reality. You have to decide how to divvy it up and how many ways you divide it up. And so, you know, I've divided it up into 2 for simplicity's sake. But you can divide it up into 11. But then if you're going to divide it up into 11, why not divide it up into 32 or 10,000? You know, why is Isaiah suggesting that we pick one example in order to make sense of things? And then why did I talk about 2 examples?
Exactly.
It's because you have to make whatever choices you are, and it's always about satisfying, and you're always going to lose something, whatever choice you make.
Did you just say satisfying?
Yeah, that's a word.
I like it. I think that within that context of honor and dignity, as far as cultures go in the United States, a lot of it has to do with things aside from the farming and herding, because a lot of the dignity cultures are based around cities, right? That's one aspect, and we can point to ancestry as well. But there's also I thank you for the definition, Hunter. Satisficing, verb gerund.
Satisficing. There's also a Wikipedia article about the cognitive bias strategy.
Yes,
of course there is.
Yes. Accept an available option as satisfactory. I'm going to use satisficing or satisficing. I don't care. But what was I saying? Oh, so it's not merely a convention of culture. It's a convention of one's geography as well, right? So because culture and geography are inextricably linked, that's part of it as well. So you have a situation in which cities are the locus of the places calling for gun control, and are also the locus of the people calling for pro-choice because of necessity. Like there's more wanton sex in situations in which you would need to have an abortion in a city than there is, in the middle of nowhere. So they're deeply pragmatic in what they're calling for in a lot of ways. And having the same policy for everywhere in a state is not necessarily the most, pragmatic way of governance, I would say.
And
I just had an idea. What if we had different laws in different places?
Oh,
this is so crazy.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the arguments that is the basis of the anti-federalists, is that what's good for the goose isn't always good for the gander, and that's part of the problem that we find ourselves within the media landscape, is that we have what was once national media. Now we have international media and people calling for the same solutions to problems around the world for everything.
So in the beginning, it was states' rights. Sorry, Hunter, it's the second time I've interrupted you.
Oh no, it's all right.
Yeah,
go ahead,
you know, in the beginning of the U.S., it was states' rights, but maybe it should even be like county rights. Like, what does each county do? And be like, I am I don't know, Norfolk County. I have no idea. Like, I am this county resident, you know, and that's above all, before even American, before, you know, Virginian or something like this. I think that could be almost a better solution. It sounds like.
So, well, I find that the states' rights argument. No, I was going to say that the states' rights argument is no longer a partisan thing, because we see liberals using that argument, especially for marijuana laws. So I think it's just a convenient tool to use depending on who's in power. I don't really see it as, a partisan thing anymore.
Yeah, and I think it's also, I think it's important to recognize that, you know, part of the problem is also that we have a lack of global law. So there's a whole series of dysfunctions that come from not having functional global law in terms of, you know, people being able to do, the reason why we have the Magnitsky Act and things like that is because people commit crimes internationally and then are able to move their money into safe havens and benefit from functional institutions even as they're undermining them elsewhere. So, you know, what we need is a mixture of, which is what United States was intended to be, which is a nested hierarchy. So there are states' rights, there are county rights, and we already have county rights. There are county laws, there are city laws, there are laws for, you know, even within, you know, private clubs or within a particular gated community or within any sort of fraternal organization of the Elks. There are many, many, many law systems, and people subscribe to those many law systems at the same time. The point is that the various levels have become dysfunctional and unintentional. I mean, that's the main thing, is if you listen to what Isaiah was saying, if, you know, the conversation around abortion or gun rights or any of these issues was like, hey guys, you know, culture is inextricably linked with geography. We live in an environment where this set of rules makes particular sense for our particular needs, but we understand that in your environment, you would need a different sets of laws, and we respect that and understand that. Then there wouldn't be a culture war. There would be a culture discussion. And that's
so refreshing to hear.
Yeah. So let's get to a culture discussion.
So why do people like take the states' rights and county rights even farther to like all the way to complete anarchy on one end of the spectrum, and then go all the way to the other end of the spectrum and have like one global government on the other end of the spectrum?
The real question is, why do humans tend towards extreme single variable solutions that deal with whatever problem they see most clearly and then reject any objections to that simplistic solution? Well, that's the human mind.
Well, is it the human mind though? Because that's more of a European-centric way of looking at the human mind, because that's not how things are addressed in East Asian cultures as they are. Like everything is based on how a family or system or, you know, how things interact. It's an interactive thought process as opposed to a mechanical thought process. You know,
well, and also it's dialectic as opposed to about being debate and defeating the other perspective, right? You're trying to reconcile the different perspectives.
Hegemonic, yeah. There's definitely a hegemonic aspect to the discourse in American political discourse specifically. Like somebody has to win, somebody has to lose, and it's winner take all. And there's no compromise. And that's part of the problem, is that there's no compromise. The way that things have happened since the Great Depression and the New Deal has linked each state so deeply economically that the cultural aspects and the social aspects have come along with it unwillingly. in a lot of ways. Like, why with gun control, a lot of the problem seems to be that gun manufacturers want to make more money by selling more guns in more places. So they want to keep markets open, which, you know, is a reasonable attitude for a company to take. But at the same time, you know, why would anybody in the right mind want to have AR-15s in the middle of San Francisco? You know, it doesn't seem to make sense. It's like you can't do certain things given the geography in which you're in. They're just not feasible. What would be the logical reason for having an AR-15 in the middle of San Francisco? It just doesn't seem to make sense unless you're faced with onslaughts of you know, Viet Cong coming in. And that may
zombies.
Or zombies. Let's go with zombies. That's less culturally
guys, you're both right.
Explosive.
Zombie Viet Cong.
There could always be a zombie Viet Cong apocalypse.
The corpse of Ho Chi Minh.
Communist zombies.
Commie zombies. Zombie commies?
Which is already going to be a great film that I can't wait to watch. It's actually Brian Callen's greatest fear is commie zombies, but he's prepared for it. He's been training for it his whole life.
Sharknado 2, Commie Zombies.
Starring Brian Callen. So anyway, I think that's the point is that it makes no logical or rational sense. But I mean, my perspective on the culture wars, because I didn't grow up in America, so I come at this mostly from an outside standpoint, is it just seems like on every issue, both sides have argued each other to the extremes. And now everybody has so dug their heels in at some extreme point of view that it's like they're worried that if they give an inch or start to compromise, that, you know, the other side is just going to take a mile. And so they're just like, you know, either let's get rid of all guns or let's have all guns at the same time. Or
that's why it's a culture of war.
Yeah, and it drives people to more and more stupid perspectives. And gets everybody further away from something they can feel good about.
Yeah, and so this was my question in the beginning. You know, I kind of see, you know, the internet as a multiplier, like of things that are already there. And so, could it ever get so bad? Could it ever get so extreme that people are like, "I'm done. I've heard enough exaggerations. I've heard enough, you know, misinformation that I want to get out, or I want to see, you know, I want to see the truth. I want to see MMA." Is that possible? What do you guys think?
It is. It happened to me.
Well, I think I'm gonna go with President Nixon here and say that there's a silent majority of people who fall in neither camps. That generally seems to be the consensus with a lot of the analysis that I've read. That's not done by like Vox magazine, who's trying to say the world's more fucking divided than ever, or, you know, Time saying polarization is at an all-time high. Polarization was at an all-time high during the Civil War. That's when polarization had a real high point, because people were in this. They were literally killing black people in the streets of Baltimore and in the streets of New York because of the war. That's not what's happening now. What's happening now is people at the fringes are co-opting tragedy in a lot of ways to try and push a political point that doesn't necessarily meet the reality that they're trying to say, right?
Oh, doesn't this come back to like ethics and sensationalism in order to advance a particular agenda?
Yes. I mean,
so I think that the problem with the Nixon quote is that when Nixon was saying that the extremes of both ends weren't, I don't think, anywhere near as far as they are now, or at least there weren't as many people out there. And I don't think there's a silent majority. I think maybe there's a silent third that's kind of hovering around that middle area.
I think that's a perception based on the volume at which people are amplified nowadays. Like before
The Illuminati.
Yeah, the Illuminati, of course it's that. Like if you look at in 1968, let's go with 68 when Martin Luther King was killed, right? How many riots across the United States were there, you know? Or the Kent State shootings in 74, 72 or 74? I can't remember exactly. But there were some 50,000 people on the Kent State campus, so much so that the National Guard had to be called in. Where are those same aspects that there are now? You know, the silent majority is larger today than it was in those controversial years. It's just that the people on the fringes are louder, so they seem like they're bigger.
And they have better ability to organize themselves, produce their own media, saturate everybody's news feeds with memes and all of that. I can't remember. I just tried to find the article, but there was some article from like Politico or Foreign Policy, and it was someone I think from the American Enterprise Institute who had just quit, and he said that basically there were 15% on each side of the fringes, and there was a 70% in the middle. And, you know, I think that if you look the world over, like there was also Dambisa Moyo, who we just had on the podcast, in one of her talks, you know, her recurring message is, you know, part of the reason why Africans are gravitating towards the Chinese model of development is because they just want shit to work. And, you know, that's the point, is I think the majority of people just want shit to work. And if you build communities of people who are like, hey, you want shit to work? So do we. Let's figure out how to do that. Then that has the real potential to change the world, because there are a lot of people all over the world who are fed up with bickering, and they want decent roads, decent schools, decent hospitals, you know, decent standard of living. And they're sick of like arguing over symbolic things that are being used to divide them and cover up for dysfunctional systems.
And
I think that if there is a silent majority, though, like unfortunately, and maybe this is just my own limited bias perspective based on my limited experience, but it seems to me that most people I talk to about political or cultural issues or something like that, they just don't really care, and they just think it's boring. But a lot of them seem to just assume that governments are corrupt, but they don't want to do anything about it, and they don't even vote or anything like that.
Well, and that's exactly what I was going to harp on. You preempted me on that, but a lot of the problem is that there seems to be, to get on Ladin's Illuminati point, there seems to be a concerted effort to keep people thinking that there is a dichotomy within this within the political landscape in the United States, that there is the red team and the blue team, right? When in reality, of registered voters, some 28% are registered Democrats and some 30% are registered Republicans. The big middle is that 40% of people who are unaligned. And I think the number is actually closer to 48 to 52% of American voters are not registered with one of the two political parties. And then within that, you know, Pew and New York Times polls tend to say, oh, even though they don't register in the party, they still vote one way or another. It's a fucking shell game to show that there's a dichotomy. There's not a dichotomy. People want the government to work. And they don't want to think about it.
And to Ladin's point, the more and more polarized things get, I think it was a few years ago, was the flip where the largest group of people was the independents, and they continue to grow larger and larger because they're like, so much shouting, no results, I don't like this, make shit work. That's my centrist voice. You guys have now heard my conservative voice, my liberal voice, and my centrist voice.
I'm not sure if that voice was accurate.
It sounds like Dustin.
Yeah, actually, woke
You were
centrism
trying
sounds
to be
like Dustin.
monotone, weren't you? You're inhabiting the soul of Bert Vox.
Oh, Bert Vox, the greatest monotone. Guys, have to go to dinner with the Aguilars and Kate Fogarty because the Aguilars are moving to Arizona, and this is my last chance to see them before they leave my state. But I think this is a great conversation, and I think the reality to me is that, yeah, it's making a basket of reasonables who are sick of the ideologues and just would like shit to work without them having to think about it too much. That's where the real hope for change lies. The future lies with the proles, to quote 1984.
Yeah. Say hi to them for us.
Yes.
I will. Love you guys dearly.
Right.
I'm going to get John to build some stone shit for me.
Yeah, make him ask him for a stone squatty potty.
Oh, the dream. The stone squatty potty, super movable, really convenient in the morning. You can just like get out of your stone squatty potty and really get out your workout. Oh my God, it's Adam Hansen.
Holy crap.
Oh, damn, look at him sporting that dew.
Yeah. Looks like you're rocking some eyeshadow too, man.
Yeah, that is really New Jersey.
It's a theme weekend.
He's in a 50s band.
Very nice. Anyway, so Dustin, somebody in the whatchamadealy in the YouTube chat just asked about the monk debate about political correctness. I think that's another topic to broach within the context of the culture war.
Yeah, it's probably one of the most talked about topics of the culture war. Unfortunately, I'm a busy man and I won't be able to attend that monk debate. I think it's happening in DC area, right?
I had no idea where it was happening. Didn't they already had it?
Oh, did they?
Yeah, I believe so.
That's right. Yeah, I didn't attend. That would have been pretty cool though.
Yeah, they
What
live
was that? Can
streamed
you
it.
guys bring us up to speed?
What?
Can you bring us up to speed? What was it?
Oh, it's a
was it?
monk debate. It was with Jordan Peterson, Stephen Fry, Dyson, Goldberg about political correctness.
Did anybody here watch it? I didn't, because
I did not either.
I've been steadfastly avoiding everything with Jordan Peterson for like a year and a half.
Yeah, same here. But I think I would have watched it for Stephen Fry because I really do enjoy Stephen Fry. And from what I could see on like readouts of what happened was that basically Stephen Fry's argument was that if you start curtailing what people can say, you're hurting the people themselves who would be the ones to benefit most from free speech. So the oppressed classes benefit most from free speech, right? That was the argument against that Stephen Fry used. Essentially, I may be mischaracterizing because I did not watch the debate and I've not done primary
I saw a 10-minute
stuff.
highlight. I saw a 10-minute highlight because it was Tyson called Jordan Peterson and then doubled down and said it again after he took issue with it, an angry white male.
Well, he kind of is an angry white male.
Is that politically correct?
No.
He was on. No, it isn't.
To call somebody out based on their race is not politically correct.
Yeah, and I'll give credit to Jordan Peterson saying, let's say I grant all this white. They were talking about white privileges, and let's say I grant all that. What am I supposed to do about it? Which is a great point. I mean, this is the whole issue with race. We can't do anything about our race, so why don't we talk about what we? And I rarely come to Jordan Peterson's defense, by the way. But in this case, I find that Tyson guy kind of a buffoon who attempts to use large words. Every other word is a SAT word. And I find that pretty hilarious.
Peterson's guilty of that too. So let's
oh my
be
God.
honest about that.
They're
Yeah.
intellectuals in the intellectual status.
No, Tyson isn't an intellectual.
Dyson.
That's for sure.
No, I mean they
It's
see
Dyson.
themselves that way.
Dyson. But it got a little heated, and I
Well,
just
Dyson
saw it
a
at my.
professor at Columbia or something?
Yeah, he does have a preposterous way of talking sometimes.
Oh my God! It's like it's like an SNL skit. It's really hilarious.
Oh, he's a professor at Georgetown. Yeah,
How could anybody talk in defense of political correctness? I think whoever.
Well, it's
I'm
easy.
sorry.
It's easy to talk in defense of political correctness because
It
there
is?
is a. Oh yeah, because
You can act like you have the moral high ground.
you can act like you have them. Exactly. Thank you. You can act
And,
like you
and
have
it's
the
a
moral high
short-term
ground.
perspective. You have a short-term moral high ground, so that's why it's even easier.
Yeah.
But it's not the moral high ground, right? Because the highest, one could argue that the peak of of moral high ground is free speech. I mean,
Well,
that-
that's
that is
your
the-
argument.
that is the-
That's your argument. But others would
Or
argue
we
that
just
the
don't
majority
need
and
to
the people in
moralize.
power.
Isaiah? Why don't you make an argument against free speech? I'd love to hear it. So
that
right?
the argument against free speech that is posited most vehemently is that free speech is amplified by political power, and those with greater political power can use free speech to marginalize oppressed or unprotected people. That's the argument.
No, we all
saying
have
that
free
I
speech.
support- I don't-
Right, I know.
I'm not saying that I support either argument.
I understand.
right?
I understand. Yeah. I
But
just
that's the argument.
I would hate to be on stage and have to defend political correctness. I mean, political
and that's
correctness
using-
itself
that's
is
granting-
is laden with implications about political correctness. Defined is let's dance around reality.
No,
because
that's
it's
not political correctness defined. That's your slanted definition of it, which is not to say that you don't have a shred of veracity within your characterization there. What you're saying
Political correctness
is that political correctness is antithetical to free speech. And that's not the argument that people who would support political correctness believe. They believe it's freer speech. So they're both holding free speech as their paradigm. But what they're saying is that the discourse should be tailored in a way that is not oppressive to people who have historically been oppressed and repressed by a majority. That's their
And they both-
argument.
And they
I don't
both
agree
see
with that,
oppression
but that's
through
their argument. They
completely
both
different
support
lenses.
free speech, and this is exactly the moralization.
No, political correctness. No one who defends political correctness as when it's called political correctness. If it's called political correctness, you don't really find people defending it. You define people defending rights of certain groups and so on. And your example of larger voices have bigger platforms and so on. I can understand all that.
This is why how you frame a debate is just as important as the content of the debate. If it was a debate on speech as such, as opposed to a debate on political correctness, then you could have these same arguments and the word political correctness will never come up, and the two sides would be just as entrenched.
Political correctness means certain truths are off the table because
you keep circling
they're
back
impolite.
to discredit political correctness, and I'm not defending political correctness. I'm trying to outline the argument as they make it.
Who's they?
As the people who were on this monk debate seem to have
Perhaps
defended it.
people on the far left.
No, people who believe that certain words and certain turns of phrases should not be acceptable within public discourse, right? And this is a societal as opposed to a legalistic aspect of speech.
That's an attempt to limit others' free speech. That's the perfect definition of it.
It's not a deliberate attempt to do that, though, because they see free speech differently from people who defend free speech.
Can someone on a desktop look up the definition of political correctness? because I'm on a phone, so I can't do it. I normally do it, but political correctness is an attempt to quiet those who's speaking in a manner that they find offensive or impolite or loathsome and so on. And again, I'm speaking for myself.
Do you want me to use the dictionary definition?
Yeah, sure. Did you look it up?
Yes.
Could you read it?
Yes, that avoidance, often considered as taken to extremes, of forms of expression or action that are perceived to exclude, marginalize, or insult groups of people who are socially disadvantaged or discriminated against.
Right. Limit the speech or the expression of certain people because of the opinions of other people.
Let me read that again.
That's an encroachment on free speech and expression.
Let me read that again. The avoidance, not the limitation, the avoidance of often considered as taken to extremes, as you're saying now, of forms of expression or action that are perceived to exclude, marginalize, or insult groups of people who are socially disadvantaged or discriminated against.
Right.
It's an avoidance, and
that's worse than limiting.
So why don't we talk about why people see this differently rather than getting caught up in the definition? Like we understand the definition now. So why does everyone think that people sees
I could tell you exactly why.
Go ahead, Dustin.
Yeah. It's because there's a perception that the left wants big government. So seeing as this movement mainly comes from the left, it is perceived that they're going to use governmental power to institute these politically correct views.
By limiting the speech and expression of others.
Hypothetically.
Yes, hypothetically.
Right.
Now, for my part...
To me, I'm sorry to interrupt. To me, that, boy, if there's one thing we all should be able to get behind, regardless of political persuasion or philosophy, on a number of issues, is free speech. The only thing that guarantees my free speech is if I guarantee your free speech. Then no one can come into the room and limit my free speech. If I don't have the power to limit yours, you don't have the power to limit mine. That's how it always that's the only way it works.
It doesn't work that way, though. Like,
how does it?
I'm sure you know. Well, if you work for somebody has power over your speech.
Well, everybody works for somebody.
And everybody's always in a state where they have to curtail their speech, regardless of what the law says. Like I can't go out. Like if I were to go out into the street if I were to go into West Baltimore.
You can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater just for shits and giggles. Is that the example?
No, that's not what I was going to say. What I was going to say is that I am not going to go into West Baltimore and say niggers should all die because that will get me killed. Now,
so in the early 90s, there was this big PC thing too, and at the time it was a lot of not everybody, but there's a lot of people like, oh, I can't call these slow kids retards anymore? You're gonna tell me I can't say that? I can't call these gay people queers, and to me, political correctness, it's been less about like trying to take somebody's right to say something and just asking them not to be assholes to people.
So anybody our dear friend, that's probably more how those type of people would see it, right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, so our dear friend from the group, Mike Spencer Bound, Most Traveled Man in the World, he said that this is a form of heraldry. So basically, people go to higher education in order to speak fancified, and it's kind of a way of distinguishing themselves. And it's not useful because in the end, the meaning's the same. If you use a one-word thing like retard or two-word one like mentally,
that is the point. Excellent point.
Exactly. So and guess what? Mentally challenged now is starting to mean the same thing as retard. So
Well,
guess what? They're going to have a 3-word definition
George
next,
Carlin
and then a
did
4-word one.
George Carlin did a skit about this where in
Shell
World War
shock.
One, exactly.
Yeah.
It was shell shock, and he's
Combat fatigue.
Combat, and then it went to post-traumatic stress disorder. And his point at the end was, if we called a spade, maybe they'd get the help they need. That's what I mean. Political correctness, again, that's a laden term where, those that value free expression should find loathsome. You shouldn't. You should be able
those
to
who value
communicate.
free expression do find it loathsome. That's not the issue at hand. It's people. The most common usage of the word political correctness is by those who critique political correctness. So by framing it in the context of political correctness, you're automatically going to generate a negative response to it, because it seems
Exactly.
as if
I agree with you.
saying you're going to, as you described, curtail speech, regardless of what side is using it. Now, political correctness in 1950 meant a whole hell of a lot different than it means today. In 1950, it meant anything that you said that could be construed as being related to communism could get you arrested and blacklisted,
Mm-hmm.
So these things shift over time, and usually
that's another reason why it's loathsome. That's why free speech has to win.
Well, that's a value judgment on you, and while I may agree with you, I'm not going to say
we all agree, because you'd have to come out against free speech. And I've yet to come across somebody who argues against. I mean, other than that, there are some,
and that's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying, is that you're not going to find somebody who's going to say free speech is bad.
And Ed, similar to when you and I have talked about topics like morality and religion before, I think that I kind of agree with you too about political correctness. I think that if you want to change people's minds about political correctness, it's not that useful to label them as immoral, because they'll be less likely to listen to you.
Yeah, no, I'm not. It's not a morality issue, and I agree with your point about diplomacy. If you want to change hearts and minds, you want to couch your arguments in sensible, reasonable talk, right? Again, it's not the content. It's not the content of the speech. It's the principle that we all have to have free speech. I mean, the Jerry Falwells of the world, we would have to go. We should all be willing to fight for the Jerry Falwells of the world to have the right to say what they want to say.
And the Larry Flints.
Yeah.
And the Hugh Hefners. And everybody.
And the preacher I just
Alex
saw on
Jones.
Twitter, and the preacher I just saw quoted on Twitter, who said that the Antichrist will be a homosexual Jew. I knew the word Jew was going to be in that 5-word tweet. I was just waiting for it, and sure enough,
he has to be a homosexual too.
Yeah, he's got to be gay, which means there's an 80% chance he's gay and can't deal with it. I mean, whatever.
Better than a fire monster.
I think the way that you were addressing it, Ed, was the exact reason why the problem exists in the first place. And that's why I was pushing you so hard on that. Because you were trying to make it, even though you said it's not about morality a minute ago, you were making a moral argument for free speech over political correctness, as if they're diametrically opposed. And they're not.
They are. Yes, they are. Yes, my contention if you're for political correctness, again, the word political, we need a different term than political correctness. Diplomacy, we need diplomacy. We don't need political correctness.
Well, I think one thing that's getting off track too is it's not so much as something like, if we're going to specifically talk about the United States
and Canada.
No, because Canada doesn't have the freedom of speech that we do. Obviously.
That's true.
So the funny thing is that people who
I
are
could
pundits
technically
on
get
this.
fined $10,000 for any particular reason.
Well, if we're thinking about the political pundits who talk about political correctness and freedom of speech, they're always pointing to models outside of America, like the UK or Canada. But I find this is ridiculous because our very Constitution precludes that cannot happen. Like, you cannot get the government involved in monitoring or curtailing speech. Like, you can yell the N-word in the middle of the street and nothing's going to happen to you as far as, having some type of penalty or fine, unless it's truly disturbing the peace. But, I think it's an overblown fear, and it's mostly because, I like Peterson and everything, but he uses a lot of slippery slope argumentation to make Americans believe that we're going to fall into a state in which the First Amendment will no longer apply. I just don't think that's going to happen at all. So
to quote
that's
one
just
of
my
my
opinion.
Maybe
to quote one of my
maybe
favorite
you
movies,
guys know more about law than me, but like, could the Constitution be amended to take away that right?
So how is a constitutional amendment passed? You need 2/3 of the legislature in both houses to propose and pass the amendment, right? Then it goes to the states, and you need 3/4 of the states to ratify it. It's only been done 18 times, right? There's 28 amendments to the Constitution. Actually, aside from the Bill of Rights, when the original Bill of Rights was proposed and sent to the states for ratification, there were 12 amendments that were on there. There are more amendments that have been proposed than have been passed by either house, right? To change the Constitution is such a tall order that you couldn't change the Constitution to try and get, Citizens United overturned or campaign finance done. Changing the Constitution is incredibly difficult. And like when they passed prohibition, that was a situation in which people had to go. There were literally women going from bar to bar, smashing bottles of liquor in places. And, it was an insane situation in which that's how that happened. And it was initially proposed. Temperance began as a political movement in the 1880s, and it took 40 years, it took 40 years from the time that the temperance movement started to when the amendment got passed, and it only took 10 years for it to get repealed, right? So it's incredibly difficult to change the Constitution in that way. It is extremely unlikely that the First Amendment will ever get repealed. Now, there are laws that have been passed that, to me, seem to violate the First Amendment, like the Espionage Act, some clauses within it. And that's a whole different argument altogether, right? But to get back on
Israel, what do you think about the Israel boycotting thing?
I think that's horseshit, and it's a violation of the First Amendment, in my opinion. Especially within the context of government workers cannot support boycotts of foreign countries, and I can't remember the fucking law in question. Like, there's so many shell games that they play to get around shit legally. Like, government contractors can't do anything. Government contractors are not employees of the government, so they are not necessarily being prohibited from, say, boycotting Israel by the government itself. They're being prohibited by the company that they work for as a condition of employment. So that's how they get around shit like that. There's very little political power that people who espouse political correctness. I'm going to use that terminology just as a shorthand. There's very little political power that those people actually have. You know, you're not going to be able to do anything to stop people from calling people insulting names anywhere, right? That's just not going to happen. You're not going to get arrested. Like, I could go into any city in America and start calling people the most heinous of racially pejorative names, and there's nothing that in and of itself is not enough to get me arrested. I could put up a poster on a subway with whatever offensive information I would like, and that's not enough to get me arrested on the speech itself. Vandalism maybe, but not on the speech itself.
They'd have to use something else to get you. They couldn't get you on speech.
Yeah. And that's why people on the left can get away with calling President Trump a Nazi. Because we have free speech. They're not anti-free speech.
Yeah, so you have, the Nazi Trump and the Muslim Obama, and people are allowed to say that stuff without criminal prosecution.
It's again, the people on the fringes color the discussion so much that we believe that there's a political correctness problem in the United States. And there's
I think it's exact opposite. Like, look at how big comedy has been getting these past 4 or 5 years. That just tells me that it's the exact opposite.
Say again?
Well, I think comedy is the barometer in which you can tell, how far political correctness is going. And comedy right now is booming. So as far as that goes, I really do.
That it's booming. Why do you say that it's booming?
Because it is. Like, there's so much more interest in comedy now than there has been in the last 4 or 5 years. Like, just think about all the touring comedians and how many there are and how many much more are making more money than they have previously.
Aren't there really politically ideological comedians too, though?
Yeah, there's comedians of all
Dennis
stripes. Yeah. Yeah, there are political comedians, there are apolitical comedians. They're all over the place. I don't think the thing is the political correctness game is big business. It gives big business to comedy. Yeah. Because comedy becomes forbidden and then everybody wants it.
Well, that, and it becomes something easy to make fun of, right? Like, you could talk about like Joe Rogan's last fucking special, Triggered. That was the whole premise. Like, Joe Rogan has the biggest independent podcast in the country. If there was really a free speech fucking, pogrom going on against comedians, do you think that would happen? I don't think so. Just like communism was a red herring, this is a fucking red herring. It drives me insane. Like, there's nobody trying. You're not going to get sent to a gulag for saying that we should go and shoot towelheads in Iraq. You're not going to get sent to the gulag for that.
Google is a gulag, bro.
Say again?
Bucko.
I said Google is a gulag, bro.
Yeah. But
yeah, it is kind of funny that like these marginalized, quote unquote, marginalized people and the ones that are complaining the most about being silenced have like the largest audiences ever, like bigger than CNN, and they're like, we're being oppressed, says the one with the biggest audience.
Yeah, and they got that whole platform by their supposed oppression.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I look at the free speech kerfuffle that goes on, in the media and whatnot, as Anglos arguing about what it's what is a good Anglo-Saxon American? You know, should we have pride in our heritage, or should we be ashamed of our heritage? The answer is, of course, just look at it for what it is. Take what you want to be proud of and be proud of it, and, you know, abhor the parts that are aberrant, you know?
Well, I'm going to go the extreme, and I'm going to say neither. Like, personally, I don't think someone should be proud of something that is an immutable characteristic. Like, you could be proud of an achievement, but why should you be proud of somebody else's achievement that they accomplished 50 years ago based off of their skin color?
That
Like,
segues really nicely into identity politics.
God, that's the stupidest. Identity politics is the stupidest fucking thing
It's
has
like,
come
it's
out
kind
in
of
the
like
last
political
10 years.
correctness.
Say again?
It's kind of like political correctness in that way.
Yeah, and that's
Great
what drives
point,
me
Andrew.
nuts. That's what drives
Great.
me nuts about it, is that it's simultaneously a lampoon of a phenomenon that happens, and also something that's been co-opted to, like, make the discourse seem so insanely not what it is really trying to get at. You know? It drives me nuts. Like, the whole thing just drives me fucking nuts. This is the problem with talking about the culture war, is it drives people insane because it's so stupid.
Exactly, and it could be a red herring, and the ones that are sucked into it, you know, they're the actual fools, you know. So anytime we post about anything identity politics, then we're the idiots.
Oh yeah,
I find it fascinating that those that play the identity politics game the most are the so-called social justice warriors. In other words, that's
I'm not gonna say that they are. There's equal sides of identity politics being played.
Fair enough. What I'm trying to say is, if you play the identity politics game, you are foreclosing being able to do anything about it, because we cannot change our identities, depending on which identity you're talking about, of course. I was thinking about race or sex. I guess you could change your sex. I mean, I guess you could change your race. You could self-identify and change. But the point is, it's the last card you should play, right? The facts float free of our identity, right? I mean, this is what's so pernicious about it. You can't do anything about it. And Dusty's point is, you're taking pride in something because you happen to be born a certain way, when you had nothing to do with it. I mean, the flip side of that is to play the identity politics is to foreclose any opportunity to make the world better, right? I mean, this is what's amazing about it. The last people should be playing identity politics are those that are trying to foment change, because you can't change. Again, depending on the identity, but generally speaking, the lines that are drawn in the victimology poker game that these identity politics people play are the immutable facts about. I mean, I'm just amazed. I should spend a week counting how many times the word white is used in my Twitter feed, not by regular tweeters, but by Fox News, and again, they're not even close to the biggest. The Huffington Post. I have a spectrum of news sources. The New Yorker. I mean, there's a dozen of them. The word white is used 30 times a day, and it just I don't get it. I don't understand why. There could be good reasons for it being used if it's salient, but white people can't do anything about the fact that they're white. That is not going to help anything.
But Ed, like you know too, obviously, that, you know, people also identify with their tribes, and we can all change our tribes. So those are aspects that you can change too. And you also mentioned other aspects that you can change, but that is also an important point, that people are tribal about aspects of themselves that they cannot change.
Yeah,
too.
I mean, I guess my point is focusing on what can't be changed doesn't seem all that helpful. It's literally contributing to the divisions in our world. Focusing on what we can improve seems to be what we should be focusing on.
So I would have asked, like, instead of counting how many people are saying white, why not follow all those people that keep saying white? Like, I look on my Twitter feed and I don't see white 100 times a day, because I follow, there's a bunch of, I follow a lot of economics guys, and they're not talking about white too much. They're talking about economics and economic theories, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, why even let that feed run into your head like that?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I guess what I'm referring to is large media platforms use the word white. I mean, it's just shocking. And I'm talking from the New York Post, the New York Times, the Politico, I just said it, Huffington Post, Fox News, MSNBC, like large so-called official media outlets use the word white. I mean, it's just, it astounds. I mean, I know that they just, it's clickbait and they're giving the people what they think they want and all the rest of it. I understand those metrics. This is a losing game, right? I mean, what's the end game of every news story in the New York Post, in the larger media, disclosing the race of those that took part in the first sentence? I mean, I don't.
Get some more clips.
Edward Kennedy, a half Italian, 16th Irish, 16th Scottish, 16th English, quarter Hungarian, Caucasian male. I mean, who's an atheist? Who I mean, this is.
Are you middle class or lower class or upper class? That's important too.
Yeah, throw that in. I mean, gets back to our culture wars. This pigeonholing. Again, I see it as a symptom of more on the left, and again, maybe that's just me, and I'm on the left. That they're fomenting exactly what we don't want. America is the cliche. It's a melting pot. We all have to get together, and pointing out these differences. And these aren't differences of opinion or policy or how to proceed. It's, I'm the angry white man. He's the angry white man. I mean, I see it as so antithetical to wanting to discuss the issues. Everybody's something.
And
right?
that's why I think that having a meta-analysis like we're trying to have is good, instead of pointing out, instead of taking a side and defending it.
Well, and then just take a look at the business model. That's definitely the outrage model. So you have the audience that's going to confirm their bias, and then you're going to have the audience that's going to be incensed about the article. So not only are you catering to your own audience, you're actually catering to the opposite side of the fence, because they're going to be sharing around this article that has incensed them, thus increasing their traffic.
Yeah, actually, Dusty, you were talking about this with the Gamergate or something like this, basically being blamed, for something. So I kind of think that the left is eating itself. All of us could describe ourselves as being formerly liberal, and and then now we're just like, what the fuck is going on? Like, I'm not part of the tribe anymore. Like, it's moving away without me, and they're going nuts. But I think, yeah, Dusty, you had something like this where something about gamers, and then they started making fun of their own audience or something like this.
Well, the problem is that okay, so we're going to talk about Gamergate here. Warning. 2014, we're talking about Gamergate happened mainly because all of the online publications for gaming magazines were basically ideologically, I would say, geographically and mostly ideologically within the same spheres. So a lot of the online game publications came from San Francisco. So we're talking, the most progressive place in the United States. And I don't know what happened, but there was a shift towards talking a lot about social justice issues in the gaming magazines. And they were basically starting to alienate. Yeah, they were alienating a lot of the audience. Gaming isn't an ideological thing. It's just something that everybody loves. So there just came a point in time where I guess it's a combination of nepotism and tribalism and everything else. But an associate of a game journalist was getting attacked online for having nepotistic relationships with journalists. And since they were all kind of in the same cabal, they were on the emailing lists across multiple publications that said, hey, we're going to stick up for this person, even though there was an ethical infraction on our part, we're just going to ignore that part and tell our own audiences that they're all basement dwelling, white, misogynistic, homophobic assholes. And that's kind of where it got sparked off at. And obviously I'm not white. I don't live in a basement. Not homophobic. So it got a lot of people upset that they were being painted into these groups, and it was not what the audience wanted. And if you're a gaming publication, you're there to serve the needs of your audience, which are, being honest, objective about covering issues, covering games, not filtering your views through an ideological lens. And a lot of people just were fed up with that and spoke out about it. And that blew up.
What has been the result? Because I think that was a few years ago, right? So maybe that's farther along than what we're experiencing in the rest of the media. So did they lose a big listenership, or was there a backlash, or what exactly happened with that?
What exactly happened? So Gamergate basically boycotted their advertisers. They lost six figures in advertising revenue. So they got brought down a peg, but they doubled down. There was only a couple publications that actually updated their ethics policy regarding the coverage. So one of the things that was happening a lot was that many of these journalists were financially involved in some of the publishers and the game design studios that they were covering. So right there, that's a big conflict of interest that a lot of people were pointing out, that we have all these journalists contributing money to a lot of these, what you would call, it was a big Kickstarter revolution at the time. So a lot of independent developers, lots of people willing to contribute their own funds to get these games off the ground. And there was a lot of these journalists reporting on the games that they were funding particularly. So all of this kind of came to light. It really upset gamers because of that. And there were just so many ethical issues that were going on that it kind of needed to happen just to spark the conversation about, how new media at the time, was running fast and loose with their own ethics.
Yeah, so I'm wondering now if this is what might happen with the CNN and everything that Ed's following, and just people will get fed up with it. They're finally like, oh man, Coke and Pepsi both are just really bad, and I'm gonna go for Shasta or whatever. And and kind of like Dusty's example, like you'll lose six figures, and then you'll be like, okay, well we have to change or die. So I'm wondering if this is going to be like a natural progression, kind of an ebb and flow, a natural like rhythm of society and everything like this, and if it'll just right itself after some time.
Yeah, I don't know, and that's mainly because of if you take a look at Haidt's moral foundations theory. The thing about on the left is that there are certain things that they do not put a lot of, I would say, um, credence in. So there's a lot of care harm on the left. There's very low, what you would call, I think it's the authority. It's very low on the left. So when they see something that's unfair to themselves, they'll certainly point it out. The problem with the right, though, it's very hard to see that in particular play out because just this really has not happened on the right where they're kind of criticizing their own publications. I don't know why that is. It could be having to do with
Honor
the
culture.
right. Well, yeah, honor culture. You're more loyal to your authoritative figures. That's not so much so on the left. So on the left, there were actually a ton of publications that went under that happened post Gamergate. So Gawker actually fell partially due to that. There were many other far left partisan publications that have fallen since then that have gone under due to that. And there have been some more centrist type of publications that kind of sprouted from that. And that's something we see kind of on the center to left, but I'm not seeing it happen so much on the center to right. But I'd need somebody who's more in tune into that world to really kind of key me in and let me know if that kind of happens on the right too as well.
Sorry, I'm engaging with the people in the chat, and we're talking about Jordan Peterson. My favorite thing to do is talk about Jordan Peterson.
In what way does he muddy the waters? And so many.
I mean, to be short about that whole topic, because I've talked about it at length with multiple people on multiple channels about multiple different aspects of what bothers me about it is primarily the cult of personality that has grown up about him, like the people calling him a modern day prophet and all that jazz. You know, what he says is less relevant to my disdain for his public persona than the way in which it's become a movement, right? I'm generally not a fan of political movements as such anyway. Like, I think it's good that they occur. I just don't want to have anything to do with them. Like, I really didn't like the rhetoric that was being used by the Occupy people, because it was like so fucking stupid. And same thing with like the Black Lives Matter people and the way that they were presenting it. It's like, you could do this better, guys. You can make a point that is more salient and cogent and convince people, but you're just digging your heels in and alienating a whole group of people who could be your allies on, you know, bad rhetoric. That's one aspect of it that bothers me. The other aspect of it
MMA
is
a movement.
Say again.
Isn't MMA a movement?
You could call it that, yeah. I don't necessarily think of it that way.
I'm not. I don't want to be an activist or anything like that.
I mean, you derailed my train of thought.
Sorry.
What was I saying? I think that political movements, I don't like them. I like that they exist. I try not to pay attention to them, but Peterson is inescapable. And because I disagree with so much of the stuff that he says, vis-a-vis like male-female relationships or treatment of mental health, even though he's an expert and I'm just a neophyte. even though I disagree with him on so many of these ideas, I can't escape him, and that is something that bothers me.
Where do you disagree with him in terms of treatment for mental health?
Say again?
Where do
Why
you
do I disagree
Yeah.
with him on his treatment for mental health? Because I think mental health is much more complex and individualized than saying it's a matter of cleaning up your own room or taking responsibility for one's actions.
Well, I think that's like he talks about it in more detail than that.
Well, yeah, I understand that, but
I think it's the regurgitation of the non-nuanced view. Do you think that's what it might be?
yeah, I think it's that the political aspect is the one that is, you know, very polarizing. But as far as the mental health aspect goes, like Carl Jung has a good synopsis about this in Modern Man in Search for a Soul, when he talks about there are those who find comfort in normalcy, and there are those who find comfort in the extraordinary. And oftentimes the people who find comfort in normalcy are those who grew up in unstable and non-normal environments, and vice versa. So just within that dichotomy, you can see that there is more to it than, you know, having a stable, clean, etc. Environment. To go,
I never
along
clean
with
my
that.
room.
Well, yeah. To go along with that, there's experiences that I've had in my life that don't necessarily align with the type of person who would be helped by Jordan Peterson, right? Like, there's a reason why so many of the people who have taken him up on his call fit a stereotype of young single males in their early 20s who have difficulty, you know, finding women or have difficulty having stable relationships and things of that nature. Yeah, it's just not something that I have found resonates with me. And that's not to say that it won't resonate with other people. I don't like it for me. So that's my particular issue with it. I can't speak for anybody else.
I think what the issue too is, of course, I certainly agree with you. I think one of the problems is proclaiming that what he says is applicable to everybody. Like, people are individuals; they have different ways in which they act. I did read some of his book. Definitely not for me. I read the first chapter, and there's like basically, I didn't even finish it, but there was like 5 or 6 pages of ramblings about chaos and order, and I was like, this is not for me, man. I don't need to be told in 20 different metaphors of what chaos and order is, but as a clinical psychologist, you are there to treat individuals. I don't think it's applicable to a society, so to speak. And that's what I think people are not getting, that you can't just clinically diagnose an entire society of individuals. But some people seem to think that you can.
Do you think that's what Jordan Peterson is trying to do?
I don't say he's trying to do it, but I'm saying that people take his opinions without nuance and believe that it must be applied to everyone. I've heard this from people online, so
yeah, that's pretty much definitely true.
Yeah, I don't know. I really like it. You know, I guess I'm in the age range where, you know, I just absorb this stuff and I need somebody to tell me to clean my room. You know, I'm living my alone. My bed's not made. But yeah, I don't know. It's you know, I like it. You know, on one end, he is kind of sometimes pulling stuff out of thin air and just kind of like, oh, this means this in this mythology. And that's pretty much my biggest, I don't know, gripe, or that's my biggest, you know, disagreement with him, it's like, okay, he sometimes seems like he's making stuff up, but at the same time, all these things are open to interpretation, so you can make stuff up. But yeah, I don't know. I really like him. I think it's really helped out.
I like the way he talks about mythology and his approach to religion. That's mainly why I like him.
Yeah, that's a lot of that is mined by Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell later on, and then Alan Watts has a lot of good insights on it as well. And those,
that's why I like what he says about that, because he reflects other great thinkers on it.
Yeah, it's fun to delve into those topics, and they like the archetype theory of personality or of mental health is actually pretty useful in trying to delineate how one's personality interacts with their society, and I like that. But again, it's just not for me. He's just not for me in his politics and in his treatment. That's not to say that he doesn't help people. This is something that keeps coming up, is that anytime you criticize Jordan Peterson, you're suddenly either not understanding his words, or you're not seeing the truth that he's saying, or you're somehow morally wrong for saying negative things about him. You can criticize somebody and recognize the good that they do, right? I mean, there are plenty of people throughout history.
Of any of that, Isaiah?
Say again?
I said I'm certainly not accusing you of any of that, Isaiah.
Well, I know you're not, but people in the comments are. People in the comments don't seem to like me all that much, which
yeah, but it's okay.
It's something I'm accustomed to. Like, it doesn't matter what.
It's life. Not everybody has to like Chinese food. Like, everybody has different preferences. If I say we go to an Indian restaurant, you don't have to like hate me as a person. It's just like that's a preference. It's what I want on a certain day as well.
Yeah, I mean, Thaddeus Russell talks about this a lot when he talks about he doesn't make truth claims as far as what is real, what is not real, what is right, what is not right, what is good, what is evil. To do that is to extend your perceptions beyond your person, right? So he makes value claims. What do I value? What do I think the people around me would value? What would I like? What kind of environment would I like to live in? What kind of society do I want to live in, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that is a more useful way of approaching the world than speaking in terms of truth.
Universal truths. Like, that's one of the problems that I have with anthropology as a discipline, is that everything that they base their scholarship on is based on finding human universals without recognizing that culture is shaped by environment, and the way that people deal with their environment differs throughout the world. And the only thing that's universal about humans is, eating, drinking, fucking, and shitting. That's really the only universality in humanity. And trying to extend anything beyond that, you start getting into definitions that are overbroad so much to be, meaningless.
Peterson I haven't read the direct quote yet, so I don't want to overstep, but apparently Peterson floated the idea of enforced monogamy, which I got a good chuckle out of. Well, his Bible thumping accidentally slipped out. I love it when that happens.
Well, with Peterson, it's kind of hard to tell, if what he means by that. And I think if you grilled him on it, he wouldn't say, of course we shouldn't have enforced monogamy. That's not what I meant. What I was saying is that the archetypes, this, that, and the other, witches and swamps, and hook-nosed lobsters come up and bite you by the nuts, so you better stay at home. Something like that.
Grilling, any attempt to grill Peterson just you just get another barrage of word salad. I mean, that's my personal opinion. I've never heard him come out with 3 coherent thoughts in a row without digressing down 7 different rabbit holes.
Sam's Bulldog, you sound like Sam Harris, oddly enough.
Nah.
Nonetheless,
no, Sam Harris reserves his he doesn't criticize him. It's interesting. He could do so a lot. I mean, when he speaks publicly with those speaking engagements he's had recently, he's basically said, you know, he's not that into most of what he says, but he doesn't really criticize him that much. But I see Jordan Peterson as someone so out of his depth, and a self-help guru of a sort, and like someone already said, if you enjoy that, I have a friend who thinks he's the second coming. I mean, I personally don't understand it. I don't find his thoughts well organized. I you know, and I haven't been exposed to all of his thoughts. But
you should check out 12 Rules, man. That was.
See, I really like.
I think the book length is just so because that's what a publisher demands. The book could have been a lot shorter.
Yeah.
Well, it reflects his ramblings. It's exactly like the way he speaks.
Yeah, it is written in the way he speaks. That is for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I've never heard him directly answer a question yet. I mean, it's just amazing to me. And again, I don't buy into he's too intelligent for me and all this kind of stuff. I don't buy any of that, because no matter how intelligent anybody is, presumably Carl Jung was an intelligent guy, and you could read his ideas and understand what he's getting at. And so, you know, the cornerstone of good communication is being able to convey ideas, however complicated the backstory, into something that's digestible. So, I mean, I've never not seen him, almost without exception, unless when he talks about that law up in Canada that wanted to force people into using pronouns and all this kind of stuff. He's coherent on that, because his fucking livelihood was put in danger and all that with the university. But when he talks about any other idea, it's one rabbit hole after another. And so I think he's not the best communicator, but I like him. I like him personally. I think he's like a kind of an engaging guy, and he's a big free speech advocate, and that part of his thesis is again, for me, something worth valuing.
Yeah, I'm solid with him on the free speech advocacy, without a doubt. The self-help stuff is definitely not for me. It's just, I don't believe that I need it. I know there are people that do, and I can understand the audience that he's speaking to, which is this, the lonely man that feels like he's betrodden by society, but that's definitely not me. So it doesn't speak to me in that regard.
That's part of why I like him, because that's pretty much me.
Well, there you go. I'm not going to denounce the help that he does for people who need it, but there are some things he gets wrong. And mainly it's me just... The thing that I don't like about his argumentation regarding political correctness is he uses slippery slope argumentation, which is not the best way to go about things. And also, I don't like moral argumentation regarding that aspect either. I think.
What do you mean, Dusty? Can you expatiate there a bit? What do you mean?
Just talking about good and evil. Like, he's big on talking about good and evil, if you've ever read his book or listened to his lectures. I don't like framing things in the dichotomy of good and evil, because I think well, this is just me personally, but when you use those items of description for particular ideas or motivations, then I believe you're painting it in a way to cause either moral outrage or an emotional response.
I agree with your criticisms about him, Dusty, and Isaiah's criticisms too.
Yeah, I don't hate the dude. Like, everything, I'm just saying everything he says isn't like gold. And that's pretty much for anybody. Like, anybody that gets angry for any type of criticism that I might have, I find odd. Like, there shouldn't be anger involved. You can critically analyze what I say and think, maybe what about this or that? But people who just get morally outraged about a criticism, I think something's wrong with them.
The value I see in him, he's literally like the first person that has, I don't know, turned me on to like conservative thinking, or been like, giving me a conservative argument that kind of makes sense. And I'm just like, oh, okay. Because, I was raised in Salt Lake City, so Mormons and, conservative, big families and all this kind of stuff was all around me. But that, I don't know, it never made sense to me. And I never got the logic behind it. But his logic, I mean, the big thing from what I draw from, his lectures and everything like this, the big idea is, things were like that before and things worked. And so we don't know why they worked. So we have to assume that if we change it, things are going to get messed up more than they're going to get better. So you should, as a default, be the way that things work. And then if you want to experiment, realize that it's an experiment and that it'll probably fail if you try to do something else. So that's kind of like, oh, okay, that makes sense to me. And that is kind of a case for maybe more conservative, monogamy and all this kind of stuff. So for me, I'm never been very faithful or anything like this, and that's bit me in the ass a lot. But this, like, literally him is the first person that's like, oh, maybe I should be, then, things will work out better.
Well, I think people should feel free to experiment, but they should also be responsive to negative results. I don't think the possibility of negative results should exclude experimentation.
So, yeah, I would echo what Dustin said in such that the way that things are is not the way that things were, right? The world changes constantly. Like, nobody could have, like, I just finished watching way too much on the Great War, World War I, right? And the way that people approached the war in 1914 was not the way that they had to approach it in 1918. But the way that they approached it in 1914 would have worked in 1900, or it did work in 1871 in the Franco-Prussian War. It reminds me of a quote from, I forget who the general was. I think it was might have been Patton. Every military quote is attributable to Patton, just like every American quote is attributed to Mark Twain. But there's no such thing as a plan when the first bullets start to fly, or to quote I think it was Mike Tyson, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, right? The way that the world changes and the speed at which it changes doesn't allow for stagnant methodology in a lot of ways. There are aspects of culture that are good for most people most of the time, and those probably shouldn't change most of the time. But then again, there are situations where political structures worked and then they had to be changed because they weren't necessarily working for enough people at the time. Like that conservative argument that because it has worked in the past, we shouldn't change it in the future, or we shouldn't change it now. that was the same argument that was made by loyalists during the American Revolution. You know, because it worked in the past means that we shouldn't change it now. Was the same argument that was being made by Democratic congressmen in 1860, you know, or 1850 about slavery. Like, these conservative arguments lend to their appeals to authority is what they are. Because something works for some people sometime, or because something works for most people most of the time, doesn't mean that it's going to work tomorrow. That's the whole balance that has to be struck between a conservative approach and a liberal approach.
Yeah, definitely. I think Paweł on the YouTube chats brings up a good point. Is don't tear down a fence if you don't know why it was put there in the first place. And I definitely agree. So my opinion would be that the conservative ideology should be the default, and anything that you do other than that is an experiment, and we should realize that it's an experiment. So it should be small, fast, break things, and realize that you're probably going to break things in that experiment. And if things really do work better in one of these experiments, then we should, grow that experiment. Then be like, okay, maybe 20% of the population does that thing. Oh shit, that's going really well, and eventually go into it. But you should be like walking on ice. You don't know which parts you're going to fall through, and if everybody jumps on one part, then that could mean death for everybody. And
yeah, and that's the way.
Gulags show that. Stalinist Russia shows that. Sorry.
Well, what existed before before the gulags were pogroms and other gulags. Like this Tsarist Russia wasn't any fucking picnic for anybody. They had serfdom, which was de facto slavery up until the 1880s. So I don't think you can't understand Soviet Russia without understanding Tsarist Russia, and you can't understand Soviet Russia without understanding the First World War. I think a lot of the criticisms that came about the Soviet Union in the 1950s and 60s were part of the Red Scare and part of the Cold War politics at the time. That's not to say, of course, that the things that they did were horrendous and that the millions of people who died at the hands of the Soviet government deserve to die. That's fucking stupid. That's not the argument that I'm making. Like, I have way more experience or way more expertise on communist China than I do about Soviet Russia. But in communist China, it was the same way. In the 19th century, 20 million people died in an armed insurrection against the imperial government of China. And over the next 40 years, additional some 5 million people died trying to reform the government. Meanwhile, they were being essentially colonized by European powers at the same time. You have to look at the conditions on the ground to understand the results of the actions of the players. Judging things in vacuums doesn't give you
the only thing that I know is that because I'm an idiot, is because the only thing that I know is that Russia should have kept the name USSR because it sounds cooler.
Yeah.
I think any country that starts with the just sounds way more wicked and crazy and cool.
Yes. Yeah, like the Congo.
Yeah, the. It means, oh, wow, they have a the in front of it. It must mean they're like crazy people over there, like the United States.
Not a France, the France, the France.
That'd be La France, wouldn't it? La France.
Vive la France! Sorry.
See, there you go, La France. The United Kingdom.
Yes. So let's get back on the culture war topic, because I feel like this is a topic that needs more mining. Because we're on the periphery of it when we're talking about exactly that. Don't tear down a fence unless you know why it's been built. I think there are a lot of fences that are trying to be torn down that people know why they're there, but not everybody does, Maybe that
like
was
building a wall. Like,
like building a wall. Like
or
why?
or I liked Hunter's comparison of like the life versus liberty and the difference between abortion and gun control, and why those opposing viewpoints are they're like, okay, on one topic we're life, on the other one we're independence. You know, why do you think that fence is there, and how do you think that fence may have come about?
well, I know one about gun control. If you think about it, the people who fear it the most are very invested in slippery slope arguments, like, oh, you take an inch, you take a mile. And then you have to think too, like how much of this is fueled by the people who benefit it the most. Arms sales, things of that nature. If you think about it, the NRA or the gun manufacturers probably love Democrats more in office than they do Republicans, because every time a Democrat goes into office, their gun sales explode. So maybe it's in their best interest to keep up this rhetoric so that, hey, a Democrat's coming in office, go buy your guns before you don't have them anymore.
Yeah. Overall, that skirts the issue. I think the culture war is a red herring that keeps people distracted from real issues like who is watching the Watchmen, what is the nature of governance, what's the government, what have the Romans done for us, basically.
So do you think it's a divide and conquer tactic? It's like, in order to get our eyes off of a singular issue so that as a collective we could have more of an impact in changing it, it would be better just to divide everybody so that nothing can get done. And
that division has been there for 500 years. That's what I think.
No, it hasn't.
No, come on. I mean, that's what I was talking about in the beginning with the 11 nations. It's different ways of thinking, and yeah, I think that has grown. That has been the nucleus, and coming off of that, and then there's like these boundary conditions, these boundaries where there's fights.
Well, I'm talking more about shared interests. One of the things that both sides have shared interests about are fairness and opportunity, being fair. I guess I'll just bring up this book I've been reading, Grifftopia. He gives a very good outline of why both sides should care about the issues that he's talking about. And when he outlines things such as the economic collapse of 2008, and even more so, the rise of gas prices when they're getting up to $5 a gallon, he went ahead and took a look at what type of political rhetoric was being said at the time of these crises. One of them, and this is talking more about the gas problem that we're having when it was nearing $5 a gallon of gas, the left blamed greed and corporations and Americans' susceptibility to wanting to drive giant SUVs and not be environmentally conscious. And the right, they had similar arguments, but their arguments were about, we need to make sure we're in the Middle East getting shit done so we can get our gas prices low. And the thing is, the problem was actually independent of either of those issues. So one of the things that Matt Taibbi highlighted in his book is that when the commodities market was enabled for oil, this pumped so much money into oil securities that regardless of whether oil was short or if consumption was up, and this actually proved to be neither, supply was up and consumption was down, yet the gas prices were at $5 a gallon. And this had nothing to do with either of those issues, but since the populace was divided along political lines, they were failing to see that it had nothing to do with Democratic or Republican policies. And that's what I mean by divide or conquer, divide and conquer. It's distracting people to the causes of specific, injustices or inequalities. And that's just particular to, the $5 a gallon issue that we were having at that time. But there are probably many different political divides that happen over these crises that have nothing to do with the political rhetoric that's coming out of either camp.
Yeah, very rarely is that the case, and Lawrence Lessig talks about it a lot in Republic Lost, and I think that's the key to understanding the culture war and why it's so pervasive. And a lot of it has to do with CNN, like the rise of cable news, as Hunter was alluding to before, and the profit model of dissemination of information changed the information space. I think that's being corrected with new media. Honestly, I do. In the terms that the big middle is growing, right? And Dustin, I think, or was it you, Layden, who pointed that out earlier, that the big middle is growing, in that, the fringes are getting smaller and the middle is getting bigger.
No, that wasn't me.
Yeah, I've seen the statistics. I think what it was, 41+% were undecided or unregistered or independent. So the party registration, like those who are registered to parties are less than those who are not. And that is a certainty.
Yeah. To say that the culture war is really the true battle of what we're looking at, it's a red herring. It's being used to distract people from the topics talked about in Republic Lost, right? That what's less than 10,000 individuals in the United States have enough money to fund candidates throughout the country, and because people need money to run for office, they're essentially only hearing the words of those less than 10,000, couple thousand people, and therefore the concerns of the individuals in the country are marginalized by these culture war topics. Like, I have to schedule VA appointments and I can't do it online, right? And the VA is one of the biggest government bureaucracies there is, but they cannot change the systems that they have, not because it would cost an exorbitant amount of money to do, and not because they don't have the budget to do it, but it's because that so many other systems are run on government contracts that are based, on this company lobbied for this contract and was awarded it, and they can't change it for this amount of years, regardless of the change in technology over the time. They have to run it out over the course of its operational window or some shit like that. So they can't roll out modern technology to handle really simple problems in the biggest government bureaucracy because of lobbying and government contracts and corporatism. That's part of the problem within the way that the government is set up. And it's not a question of big government per se, although big federal government means to me something different than what it means to other people. But like the fact that there's so much that we put into the government and we get so little out of it is a problem. And that's
kind of like what Mark Blythe says, right? Like, we're paying taxes closer to socialist countries, yet they're getting way more out of it. I don't know how accurate that is, but I don't know. I feel like I pay taxes and don't get as much as I would like out of it.
Yeah, I'm going through I'm reading Austerity right now, and he makes a lot of really good arguments in there. Mark Blythe makes a lot of really good arguments.
Yeah, I gotta. There's just so many books that I have to get into, man. I wish I could read like 1,000 words a minute.
That would be nice. It would make life a lot better for everyone.
Or I just can't wait until like we have the technology where we can just do direct downloads into the brain.
That would be
That's
interesting.
what I'm working on, guys.
Yeah,
I
dude, you got to speed it up. I want to just like look at a book, do the whole Neo Matrix thing. Oh, I know this style of kung fu now. That'd be awesome.
I could do the research faster, but
yeah.
I think I do too many MMA chats, so that's the problem.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Speaking of which, I got to jump, guys. Good night, everybody. Good chatting.
Later, dude.
All right, take it easy.
All
Ed.
right, bros. Take it easy, bros.
Bye, Ed.
Yeah,
Well,
definitely.
thank you.
Mark Blythe is somebody that I really like. Like I don't think there's really been anything that he said that I've disagreed with. I'm just like, yep, makes sense, and it's funny. So extra points for that.
Yeah, there's one thing about the culture war too that I think is just inherent to human nature, is that people like to battle. People like to get into debates, and I think it's just part of who we are as humans. And the Dunbar number precludes this, that we're gonna butt heads with people, since we cannot collectively be a country of 350 million people. Like, what is it? The only time we rally around something is when we're in extreme distress or extreme fear.
Yeah.
Like it's hard because you really don't want a society that's run that will collectivize based off of those incentives. They're like basically the worst of incentives to collectivize over, like extreme fear, extreme adversity. Like you really don't even want to get there. But we're always bickering about how not to get there, and we haven't come with a collective solution to not reach that level, which a bunch of people fear. So it's a very complex issue that has no real easy solutions.
Do we need a collectivist solution?
I think drawing a dichotomy between collectivist solutions and liberal solutions, liberal in the old sense of the word, like John Locke, I think drawing that distinction is a false dichotomy, honestly, because small groups work well cooperatively. Large groups work well cooperatively in certain respects. It's all about context. Context is just as important as the problem and the solution proposed in and of themselves. You can't talk about solving a problem unless you can contextualize it. That's what I was trying to point at earlier when I was talking about guns and whatnot. Like the whole, and understanding history and how these things came about, because like with gun control, a lot of it started out with Reagan. Ronald Reagan is the person who passed the first gun control law when he was governor of California, because he was trying to take guns away from the Black Panthers. And the Black Panthers, there were 2 instances where members of the Black Panthers killed somebody, but they operated in Oakland, California for several years as, a de facto militia. And it's kind of Second Amendment curtailment or gun control legislation has generally been passed in the past and signed on to by the majority in situations to keep scary people from having guns, which is why the discourse around gun control is so muddied nowadays. And like domestic terrorism goes along with that as well.
Well, so do you think these school shootings should be considered terrorism?
No.
All right, that was a short and sweet answer.
Why?
There'd be
why
a lot
sh-
more funding if there was.
So let's argue the inverse. Why should they be considered terrorism?
I don't know. They're not politically motivated. Well, at least as far as we know. But if we're just talking about the aspect of terror itself,
They're terrifying, certainly.
Yeah.
Would
People are really upset when it comes to kids getting shot. That's why people would, in my opinion, consider it terrorism.
Well, here's one interesting thing. Do you think, and I don't know, just speculation, do you think that these school shooters are more moral absolutists or are they nihilists?
I would say neither, because oftentimes in these school shootings, it's a question of mental health and children, and I will call them children because that's what we've agreed to call them. Children who act out in their youth oftentimes have issues of disillusionment, lack of personal connection, and other psychosocial maladaptions. And to me, what these school shootings highlight is the prevalence of psychosocial maladaption writ large, as opposed to, a moral failing or a philosophical break. There's no philosophy when you're shooting people.
All right, I'll agree with that. Would you also say that it's also a product of not having a fully mature ability to reason things out, possibly, and maybe, hormonal influences at the adolescent age?
I would say it's possible, but I would say that it's situationally dependent. Everything hinges on context, right? To say that I was never going to be in a situation where I was going to shoot up my school. That just wasn't going to happen. Why am I different than those kids who did end up shooting up schools?
Oh yeah, that was I know we had an earlier chat about the gun debate, and we did pinpoint that the environment in which these occur are not universal, and the easiest way to just look at it that way is like my wife, she works at a primarily African American school. They do shooting drills, but a lot of the teachers laugh it off because they're like, "Oh, that's never going to happen here," and they're statistically correct, or at least more towards the reality that it statistically wouldn't happen at their school. So there's definitely some type of environment that shapes those shooters, and it's typically not at a minority school, like in a subdued neighborhood, like maybe in Baltimore or any majority black neighborhood or majority minority neighborhood. But
yeah,
it's terrifying to me that those drills even have to happen at all, because I could be wrong about this, but it doesn't seem like those happen, like, not that I'm aware of, in Canada.
Hey,
yeah,
Andrew,
guys,
I have a news flash for you. Oh, are you taking off?
Yeah, I'm gonna take off. I think there's a school shooting happening, so I'm gonna go duck and cover. It was great talking.
Speaking of duck and cover,
I was Saturday schools.
I was gonna say
and cover, duck.
Are you prove me wrong, Isaiah, about that?
No, I was gonna say that the world is terrifying. you can get eaten by a bear because you're in Canada.
I'm not saying
Latin
America
can get
Florida,
eaten by
necessarily more terrifying
crocodiles.
than Canada.
The crocodiles, man, those are worse.
Yep.
Alligators are way worse than bears. Okay, see you guys.
Bye. Miss you.
Yeah, I think getting killed by a reptile is worse than a mammal.
I hear that bears eat you asshole out. So
I
So
heard
do
that
coyotes. Coyotes too.
yeah. Coyotes eat ass.
Yeah, but reptiles, man, they're reptilian. They're just cold-blooded killers.
Yes. Literally. Anyway. So where do we want to go from here since our chat mates are dropping off like flies?
I'll say that so you're saying that the culture war is a red herring, or
I believe it to be so, yes.
yeah, it was real in my life at some point. It is real to some people, and
I think
when
when I say it's a red herring, that doesn't mean that it's not real.
No, I know what you mean. Like, I'm saying the pursuit and the sustaining it is a red herring for other issues that are more, I guess, palpable, or like just the issues that cause the things are not the issues that people are fighting about. I think, is that what you're saying?
Yes. Like
Yeah, I agree with that.
people are hacking at the branches of tyranny or evil. People are hacking at the branches of evil while nobody strikes at the root. That's the problem.
Yeah, I think that's why my preface was, media literacy, getting to understand what the purpose of the article is that you're trying to read. Like, what is it trying to do to you as a reader? Like, what type of emotions it's trying to stoke into you. I think my thing is just try not to be a puppet. You know what I mean? Try not to be, easily swayed or have your strings pulled so easily. I don't mean to be like a conspiracy theorist, which I'm not. I'm just saying, when you ingest media, know that there can be an agenda. I'm not saying there always is, but there could be, and you kind of have to observe and see if it's happening. My recommendation would just for everyone, just read some books about journalism, some books about the investigative journalist process, just to figure out how do they curate information in order to try to tell the most truthful version that they can about a specific situation. And like when you're looking at blogs online, just don't even read the blog. Just read what they're referring to and try to make up your own mind about what they're referring to. You form your own opinion. Don't allow someone else's opinion to form your
my
own.
blog though.
I'm talking about like blogs that are divisive and controversial, like usually just like about political stuff, mostly. Especially if it's a blog that is trying to regurgitate news through their own view. You're not doing a news blog, are you, Andrew?
No.
Yeah, so it's mainly just news blogs that kind of filter news through their own perception. Like, we could always get to the root of the news. You don't have to have somebody filter it for you. There are some people who do that don't want to do the legwork and just say, oh, okay, this is a smart guy and I'll listen to his opinions. But I think people should really try to form their own opinions based off of the facts presented, or at least the more truthful version of the information presented as it can be.
Totally.
And I'm not saying don't listen to these other people, but because I listen to people who have specific ideologies, but I think you just should keep that in mind. Like, every time I listen to somebody that's taking an ideological view, even if it's sometimes people I agree with, I'll definitely take a look at what they're saying and say, oh, that's not true. Like, even if it's somebody I like, I say, okay,
Me too.
this person's fallible. You got to dig into them and not hoist them in such a place of awe where everything that they say is correct and true. So I think just people just need to invest more time in being critical about their sources of information, and just be critical about the way they process things. Like, try to grab information from everywhere. Don't let one specific person color you. Like, listen to all sides, as many sides as you can, and just try to form your own opinion.
And don't be loyal to ideas.
Yeah, that's for sure. I've definitely shed some loyalty to some ideas in the past. Like, I was a super huge, like, anti-feminist SJW hater. Back
I
in
was too. Not
back in the
probably
day.
a couple years ago.
Yeah, I still don't like them, but I don't like everything they say is not untrue. There's stuff that they do say that's true, and there's stuff that they say that's untrue. And I usually filter it through, okay, what are they telling me that they're trying to morally outrage me about? And that's when I try to dig at the facts. Like,
I try to look at it that way now too.
Yeah, I think moral outrage is probably the easiest way to get somebody, to motivate somebody towards a cause, even if it's in their own if it's not in their own interest to do so. So read more books. I think we could wrap it up. Do you have any last thoughts, Andrew?
No, that was all very well said, and I completely agree with what you said.
All right. So it's plug time. Go ahead.
All right. Well, if anyone wants to, they can check out my YouTube channel, Mindgasms Andrew Meintzer, and my last name is the weird German spelling, Meintzer. And I've got my Mindgasms podcast, and I've interviewed Dusty and lots of other mixed mental artists on there, and lots of other stuff. And then there's my blog at mindgasms.theblogpress.com, where I talk about ideas and whatnot. And I'm also on the Twitter at Andrew Meintzer and the Facebook Ibuha. And yeah, that's all I can think of.
All right. And please, I'm going to do all the Mixed Mental Arts plugs here. Please like and subscribe. Even if you hate our guts, like and subscribe us, because we're cool, maybe. You could check out our website. There's a lot of cool information and articles on there. You could check out the belt system, which is pretty cool. And it's a lot of what we try to use to understand people that aren't like us. And I highly suggest you check that out. On the bottom of the Mixed Mental Arts webpage, there is a Amazon affiliate link. If you like to do a lot of Amazon shopping, please use our affiliate link. That'll help us out, keep it going. Also, bookmark the link as well. That way you don't have to visit our website every time you want to use it. All right, social media presence. You can go to Twitter at mixedmentalarts.com. My personal Twitter is at the Woke Centrist. We have a Facebook group that's really active. If you want to yell and scream about Jordan Peterson or the whole Gaza situation, it's a perfect place for you. Lots of people yelling and screaming about Jordan Peterson, and lots of screaming about Gaza. If you want to jump into those debates, feel free. We have people from all sides debating all sides, so you probably won't be alienated. Also, what else? Oh yeah, the best thing of all that I forgot is the podcast, man. Go on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe to the Mixed Mental Art Podcasts with Brian Kellen and Hunter Motz. Recently, we have some couple cool ones. Cesar Hidalgo we had just released, and we also released one with a Maori New Zealander who talks about their culture and how they try to instill their culture into young men, Jordan Peterson style. So there are things I agree about Peterson's that you can groom young lost men into feeling that they matter and that they are a part of society. All right. Well, thank you guys very much for joining us this evening. Have a good night.
Adios, everyone.